Hello, good evening. Thanks for joining us this evening for this partial power loss workshop brought to you this evening by Astral Aviation Consulting in conjunction with the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Those of you that haven't met or haven't been to some of these webinars before, I'm Matt Lane. I'll be hosting and coordinating us through this evening. I'm a head of training, an active single and multi FI examiner and FIC instructor. It's brilliant to have alongside me helping this evening Nigel Wilson and Charlotte back with us as well. I'll let them say hello and introduce themselves. Nigel, over to you.
Nigel Wilson, head of training at an ATO and a DTO, and do all sorts of stuff, instructing, examining, UPLT, and other things, as well as ESA PPL that some of you might know.
Brilliant. Thanks as ever, Nigel. And Charlotte, great to have you with us again this evening. Charlotte, if you'd like to say hello to everybody.
Hi everybody, I'm Charlotte Dadswell. I've been flying for 20 years, instructing for 15, and I'm a full-time instructor at an ATO and the head of training.
Brilliant, great, thanks. Over the course of the next 90 minutes, we're going to break this workshop down into some easily digestible chunks, and we're going to cover the need for change in this subject, some bit about the regulatory change that's coming and give you some references to that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to discuss and introduce some of our thoughts as people involved in it as to how we're going to go about teaching and training this partial power loss subject as well. I'll re-emphasize it later on in the slides, but you know we're not giving you direction here. This is not, you know, Matt, Nigel and Charlotte going, you must do this. We're introducing the subject, giving you some ideas and thoughts on how we're going to go about it, and then opening up the discussion. Also, we've got Ed and Justin from the CAA that we've been working with them on putting this presentation and this webinar together. They are online, and we may bring them in as appropriate at the end in the questions and answers, which we will again really look forward to your engagement and discussion and input during that as well. And I can see already coming in the chat a really great spread of attendees online tonight, so it's great, and some familiar faces to me, and I'm sure some of the others as well. So it's great to see such a spread of people from all over the UK and even parts of Europe as well. So after the workshop tonight, we'd love you to stay in the loop with events and resources. We have a mailing list. You can go to our website, www.astralaviationconsulting.com, and you can sign up, and the link will appear in the chat box for that as well. And with that, you'll get a replay of this workshop. So don't worry about having to take notes or, you know, take detailed copies of things like that, because you'll be able to replay and pause this workshop at will on the YouTube afterwards. So some of you that have done it before, we will know that we use some polls just to get a little bit of interaction going through the night. If you're watching live, you'll be able to interact with the polls, but if you're watching on the YouTube, you won't be able to, but we will talk through and signpost the answers, so you get to see a bit of that, what it's all about and that functionality. So the first poll, and it's also worth me saying as well that with these polls, we don't actually, we don't get any stats of who said what. We can't see who's clicked what button or answer, or who hasn't answered. It's just to add to the occasion. So don't worry about it if you're worried about answering anything in the polls. So question poll one, what do people mainly fly here? We're well aware that a lot of you may fly all sorts of different types, but what is the main one category, if you like, that you fly? Just give people a couple of seconds to look down that. And Tal, who's backing us up with the tech tonight, can bring the results up for us. So about 80% people single engine piston. Got some good representation from the microlight community, gliders. Great to have some TMG people. I'm really glad to see that we've got that, and a couple of multis as well. So brilliant. Great to see you. No gyro community people here tonight, but hopefully they'll catch up on YouTube. They're normally really engaging as well. We've got a second poll tonight, and this is because of the subject here there. We're just interested to see, and again, we're not recording this, But who is here? What's the highest qualification? Maybe a student pilot, a qualified pilot of some description, instructor, CRI, instructor FI, or examiner PPL, or flight examiner CPL IR or higher. So please, if you could just pick, and we can just see what spread of qualifications we've got in the virtual room with us this evening. And Tal, if we could have a look at the results on that, please. So about 44% of pilots, about 37% CRIs, FIs, and examiners there as well. Student pilots, 5%. Let me say, student pilots, you're really, really welcome to be with us here this evening as well. Please, just because there is lots of instructors, examiners, your input and thoughts and engagement is just as important. In some cases, even more important, because you're going to perhaps be doing this for real. But it's great to see such a spread of qualifications and involvement as we go through. Thank you very much. Right. So why are we needing to make this change? So basically, as I've got on here, the AIB has investigated numerous power losses at single-engined aircraft. We will mention multis, but we're talking mainly single-engined aircraft here, and some of these have sadly resulted in fatal accidents. And this partial power loss is really becoming a theme. And the AIB have recognised that partial power loss, it's definitely a threat. It is happening out there, and they are now starting to build the trend and the evidence that it's maybe not always handled as well as it could be. And as a result, the outcomes are not as favourable as they could be. So there is the growing body of thought that with some improvements and involvements to our training, we can equip the pilots out there better to deal with this threat of the partial engine failure. Now, I'm not going to go through them all there, but we've put on there, those are some of the accident reports down the bottom. You can Google AIB and that registration and be able to pull those up and read through them there. So there's a whole bunch of those there that are leading towards them. And here is some of the key text relating to this problem here as well. So what the concern is that partial power loss event occurs, and then maybe the pilots are giving their attention to diagnose and addressing the problem, and then forgetting our key aviate bit of the deal. Okay, and this can then eventually lead to a loss of control incident as well. And there's a whole bunch of factors and things that we're going to look at. So what we're really honing in on here is it's all about decision making and handling at the same time. So decision making is really the key skill that we're going to have to get across to our student pilots and our pilot community. And Nigel is going to talk about some scenarios, as is Charlotte, of how we can integrate that into training. So what we want them to do is, in a partial power loss event, we want the pilots to be able to handle it such that they maintain control of the aircraft. That's the key outcome that we're looking for from this as well. I was at the AIB at Farnborough a couple of months ago, and we went around the hangar tour with the Chief Inspector of Air Accidents, and I think it was 6 of the piles of wreckage and the ongoing investigations were all partial power losses. And the AIB's view is the outcome could have been different potentially in an ideal world, and that's what we're really aiming to get to. So here is one of the case studies that resulted in some of the key recommendations. It's Golf Bravo Bravo Sierra Alpha at Teesside. I'm not going to go through it in depth here, but you can see in the diagrammatic on the left-hand side here, reduction in RPM, fairly low height, big runway, pilot has a problem, still maintaining height, still maintaining flying, further reduction in power loss, and then sadly resulted in an attempted turn back to the reciprocal direction of the in-use runway, and a stall spin accident with serious injuries. So this is a typical scenario that the AIB said, you know, I think we can do something better in training to equip our pilots to deal with this and not have the outcome that these pilots did there. So these were the safety recommendations that the AIB made, which the UK CAA have adopted, and hence the UK CAA is making these changes to the syllabus, to education, to guidance, and all the way through into the skills tests in order to address these recommendations. And I can let people read those in depth there. But it's all about management of the situation and giving guidance and techniques to the instructing, examining community on the rollout of these techniques. So that's the need for change. We are interested to know in a second part, have you ever experienced a partial engine failure? Yes, not sure, on reflection it could have been, so you're not totally sure, or no. So, and of course this will, you know, we appreciate that the people out there might have very, very differing flying hours and flying experience banks, but let's just have a look. Yes, not sure, or no. So Tal, if we can have a look at the results, please. There you go. So quite a split actually. So but you know, really, if we take the not sures as yeses, we've almost got 50% of the people online here, which is hundreds of people. That 50% is hundreds alone, have experienced a partial engine failure. So it is a credible threat that we can say. So that's a useful thing to have a look at, I think. So this is the scope of what we're going to cover. What's changing in the regulation? I'm going to do that shortly. Nigel is then, as a head of training, that's rolling this out into his standardization and his manuals at his organization, going to talk about how he is going to do it with his team in Ab-initio training. Charlotte's going to then add to that with some thoughts about experienced pilot training, refresher training, and then we can open it up to discussion and questions. So you didn't come here tonight to get a regulation lecture, I'm sure of that, but it's important that I think that we signpost to you where this is coming from. So the draft acceptable means of compliance and the guidance material came out from the CAA, and hopefully you will have all seen that a lot of this is coming from the General Aviation Pilot Licensing Review, sometimes called GA Licensing Simplification. There is a huge amount of change coming, which is all going to be rolled out on the 1st of October. That's to the air navigation order and the consultations and the guidance as well. And I'll show you where to actually look in detail at that. So there is a huge amount of change coming, part of which is this partial power loss as well. There's also things like the use of GNSS and the cessation of the LAPL inversion, the MPPL. So there's lots of things changing. We're just trying to concentrate tonight on the partial power loss. We're going to cover GNSS in a forthcoming workshop. But then there's an ORS 9 publication, and it comes into Part FCL. Okay, 1st of October is the regulation change. The ANO, the air navigation order, is also changing for the national things at the same time. It's all out there, but that's the flow of things. So 1st of October is kind of D-Day for all of this. If you go onto the UKCA regulatory library, you will see on there all of the text is currently in magenta, so you can see where things are coming in. So that one I've just picked out is about the revalidation of class ratings and things like that, and what the training flight should take care of as well. So the new text is all in there in magenta, so it's really easy to say as well. I also have to say, and I'm not being paid by the CA to say this as well, these regulations online are actually, I think they're great. They're really good to use. You can click through them and drop down. Whereas before, the FCL easy access regulations used to be about a 3,000 page PDF. I think these are really interactive and really good to use. They also work really great on iPad or other mobile devices as well. So have a look and just go scrolling through and look for the magenta text and have a read of what's changing as well. And Nigel, you've been rolling this out through some of your easy PPL signposting and some of your course updating as well. I think the regulations are quite accessible and quite good to use. How do you find it?
Very much so, especially the one you've got on the screen there, yeah, where it's very clear to see what's been deleted and what is going to be replaced. It's really, really clear.
Yeah. So do have a look. I commend it the way it's rolled out now. Thanks, Nigel. These changes are also going to apply to the MPPL SSEA, which again, I don't want to go into it in detail now, but that's becoming the SEP rating, microlight and SLMG, which is all being harmonized onto TMG. The CA are going to issue a new cap, which is going to issue clarified guidance on the A&O based licensing requirement and syllabi as well. So that will all be coming out as well. So again, look out for that. But we can't in a webinar, you know, double talk about every licensing combination and that as well. So most of what we're talking about is going to be the part FCL references, but just kind of take it from us that it's then going to be replicated as well across the national licenses and the appropriate national training. But again, we will try and signpost that as we go through. So this is the training course, FCL2 one thing. So it's updating it to include partial power failure scenarios. And this is the key change that we've talked about. Exercise 12 and 13. So the emergencies, engine failure to take off, including partial power loss. And again, if it's not taught prior to first solo, it should be addressed during circuit consolidation flying. I'm not going to eat Nigel sandwiches now because he's going to talk about that in more depth, but just remember that. And exercise 16, forced landing without power, or PFLs, as we often colloquially refer to. They again down the bottom, after completing the forced landing without power, en route partial power loss scenarios. Okay, so this is where it's all been rolled out. And again, you can pause this in the YouTube replay if you want to look at it in detail as well. Here's some of the guidance material, instructions in partial power failures. We're going to talk about how we're adopting it, but there it all is. And that's some really good detailed guidance in there in the guidance material. Again, stop and have a look on the replay if you want to do that. And this is not just for initial Ab-initio trainees as well. This is always being introduced into the refresher training and the hour with an instructor, again, as it's sometimes colloquially called. So yeah, the moving map devices coming in there as well, and partial power loss, different stall scenarios. So you can see the word scenario appears in a lot of the changes that are coming in. This is the move to scenario-based training rather than kind of autocratic, do this, do that, checklist style training, trying to really move on to scenario-based training and applying it to the real world. Also in the SPL, sailplanes and TMGs, partial power loss, you can see it in the emergencies there. Exercises are slightly different there, but Edna skills test as well, simulated partial power loss. So it is there in the TMG world as well. Okay, so almost enough about regulation. Don't want to give you, like I say, a boring regulation. Were you aware of these proposed changes? This is poll 4. So kind of answers were given, yes, you've read them and understood them, had some awareness, or no. Again, we're not recording who said what, just to reassure you on that. Were you aware of these proposed changes? Yes, had a bit of awareness, or no. Hopefully people have had a chance to have a look at that. And Tal, can we have a look at the results now, please? Okay, so some awareness, 58%, which is good. Yes, 26% are into it. No, 16% as well. So we've got quite a split there of people there. So yeah, but the awareness is getting out in 80% of cases. So that's good. So hopefully it's not new to all of you. Right, brilliant. In the chat as well, there is loads of people giving examples, which is brilliant. Yeah, people have had some real interesting and some quite sticky scenarios actually looking down the chat as well. So that is great that there is real life experience out there as well. We're going to move now into Nigel and Charlotte's section. I just re-emphasize here as well, this is a discussion. We're introducing the subject and giving you some ideas about how ourselves as people in industry, we think we're going to approach this. You know, you will all have, you'll need to follow, what we're hoping is we'll give this discussion, you go back to your organizations, have the same discussion, and then, you know, give out standardization, change manuals, etc., appropriate to your organization and your scenarios as well. We're really aware that, you know, an organization that just does PPLs on tiger moths may have very different scenarios, may have very different considerations to an organization that trains new PPLs on Cirrus, high-end Cirrus aircraft. So you will have to tailor everything to your specific competencies, your specific aircraft and scenarios there as well. Right, enough from me. Nigel, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So ab-initio training then. So let's just have a quick reminder about what we're going to talk about as per the CAA requirements here. So we're going to look at partial power immediately after takeoff, and partial power in the circuit, and then partial power in the cruise. They're the three main areas that's required by the new regulation. So the next bit then about training rationale. So just to put this into perspective here is that for a very long time, I've been teaching an advanced PPL course, and I've been teaching partial power loss as part of that advanced PPL course probably for about 15 years. And then when I became head of training, I inserted that into our PPL syllabus for both an ATO and a DTO that I'm responsible for about 5 years ago. And that syllabus has been obviously approved by the CAA to include those exercises that we're now about to talk about. So what I'm going to give you here, just as a sort of reminder, what Matt keeps saying is this is how I have approached the subject, and I was one of the people involved, along with lots of other people and organisations with the CAA, when they were discussing how best to go about teaching partial power. So this is what I've got in our syllabus for an ATO and a DTO. The key thing is that it has to be a threat and error management based approach based on the stage that a student is at in their training from an experience and also a skill level. So that means that you're not going to go and teach partial power in one big exercise somewhere in the syllabus. It actually is some exercises that is split across several of the existing flight exercises. And then at the end, when we do finally get to the real nitty-gritty of, you know, the whole concept of partial power and teaching it as a lesson in its own right, we'll come on to where that is. Then you can come back and revisit some of the areas that were done in the earlier stages of the training. So let's have a look at where we're going to start then. So the first one is going to be, strangely, exercise 6, straight and level. Remember, we're trying to drip feed this into the student pilot, and the whole purpose of this is just an additional exercise in exercise 6. We always teach them about straight and level flight, various configurations, but what we're specifically going to add here, or what we added, is to specifically get the student to determine what the minimum power is, what the minimum RPM is, minimum manifold pressure, whichever aircraft you're in, required for straight and level flight, and then the discussion is around at what speed. So what we've done here on this slide and the next few slides is I've taken this directly from our ATO manual, from the syllabus, with what the lesson is, and also we include written instructor standardization notes for each of those lessons. So the key thing is choose the best glide speed. So that is what the target airspeed is, and then you're going to get your student to try and establish, or to establish, what the power setting is in order to maintain altitude at that best glide speed. Now this is just a sort of a stake in the ground really for future exercises, to save them having to work out if they have partial power at some point in the future, if they have got enough power to maintain altitude or not, rather than at that time trying to work that out and wasting time and altitude. So from an instructor standardization, just a couple of points there. Yes, probably technically, if you're a pure aerodynamicist, that you should be using the minimum sink speed. But do you know what? At this stage in their training, exercise 6, we don't want to bamboozle students with multiple airspeeds to think about. Let's just stick to the best glide speed. It's going to be pretty close to what we want to achieve at this stage in their training anyway. And again, the emphasis is to give the student a ballpark figure of what the minimum power level is that they need to see in order to maintain altitude. And that's going to be used a bit later on in some of the other exercises. So that's exercise 6. So we next come back to partial power as part of the emergency section of exercise 12 and 13 in the circuit. And this might surprise some of you. If you have partial power in after takeoff as part and parcel of teaching someone the circuits, in other words, we're going to teach this bit after we have taught them how to do engine failure after takeoff, then because of their experience level and their, the lack of decision-making capability that's going to result in a good outcome, the easiest answer is you just tell them, if you get partial power, you close the throttle and you execute the exercise that you have been taught previously, which is to execute an engine failure after takeoff. So even though your engine is producing a little bit of power, you don't know how much it is, close the throttle and just get on with it. Okay, and the reason for that is it's going to happen close to the ground. We don't want low hours, low experience students trying to maintain altitude, turning back to a field or turning into different fields with the severely high risk of a stall spin accident because of their lack of experience and expertise and skill. So that might come as a bit of a shock, but we're going to come back to that one later on. But that's what we teach as part of the initial circuit training. Partial power after takeoff, close the throttle, treat it like an engine failure after takeoff and put it in the field. So after that then, we then come on to the next sort of stage, which is, well, what happens if you have partial power elsewhere in the circuit, for example, on the downwind leg? Well, in my book, okay, that's why we teach glide approaches. So in today's environment with noise abatement procedures and everything else, it's highly unlikely that an aircraft is going to be able to glide from the downwind leg back to the runway. So in my book, the purpose of a glide approach is actually to get the student to execute a gliding 180-degree turn into wind to do effectively an engine failure after takeoff into a field to the left or to the right of them by using this glide approach technique. And the glide approach technique obviously is what we're talking about here. In that if you have partial power, then again you should close the throttle and execute your effectively engine failure after takeoff using a glide approach technique into a field 180 degrees behind you from the downwind leg, for example. So it's really important, again, at this stage in their training, they don't have the necessary skill or experience or expertise to try to struggle around the rest of the circuit, trying to maintain altitude, perhaps with not enough power and gradually getting slower, especially when we've got those turns now. The temptation is to get back to the runway, and you're going to try, and they're going to try to do it, and it will result in a stall spin accident. So again, threat and error management dictates in my book that that's the approach that we take. So after that, then we carry on with the other exercises, but then we get to exercise 16, which of course is practice force landings. So after we've taught them how to do practice force landings, then we start to put all of these pieces together to do with partial power. So this is split over the two slides here, over this one and the next one, which is standardization, which we'll talk about in a second. So one of the biggest things on partial power, and we're talking about partial power in the cruise now, okay? So we're happily going along and all of a sudden a student or an engine produces partial power. So the first thing that obviously needs to be established is whether the aircraft can maintain height or not. And of course, that goes back to the original exercise 6, where you've got a ballpark figure. All right, it might change slightly according to temperature and weight and things like that, but you've got a ballpark figure as to what sort of power you need in order to maintain altitude at the best glide speed. That's the important bit. And then really partial power is an exercise in teaching the student about good captaincy and good decision making. So let's take a few scenarios then. If we're able to maintain altitude with the power that we've got, then we ought to head towards the nearest airfield. However, we ought to start picking our fields that we would use if we end up with the engine giving up altogether, so that we're preempting what might happen. When we get to our airfield that we're intending to land at, assuming we get there, then what we ought to do, again, is not join the standard circuit. The recommended procedure that we have is you go to the overhead and then you close the throttle and you give yourself like a practice force landing onto the runway. In other words, you do not rely on the power that is available at the moment, because it might fail at any moment. You use that power to get to the overhead, and then you close the throttle, and you effectively execute your own force landing just by closing the throttle, not necessarily by pulling the mixture or anything. It can, if a student messes up slightly, the chances are if they open the throttle, they're going to get some bit of power to help them out to correct the glide back to the runway to achieve what they need to do at the airfield. If it is obvious that we're not going to get back to an airfield because, for example, we have, with the best of intentions, we're unable to maintain altitude, but we have got a rate of descent on, then what we need to do is to use that information to get ourselves to a suitable landing area, farmer's field, appropriate, stubble field, whatever, and to get the aeroplane into, once again, the overhead there or a nice position in order to then execute a power off landing into that selected field. And again, the importance is taking the power off and not relying on the partial power any longer than we have to while we're going to do an approach. We can't rely on it around a circuit because it might fail at any moment and then we'd fall short of our target landing area. Couple of things then is that from a radio perspective, obviously partial power is a minimum of a pan. If we know we're going to end up in a forced landing situation off airfield, then that needs to be a mayday, and the sooner you can do it with altitude, obviously the more chance you have of communicating with someone what's going on. So from a standardization point of view, on the next slide, what we're going to do is, from an instructional point of view, is really be quite strict about, knowing whether you are going to maintain altitude or not, and then not trying to get to an airfield, or certainly not your destination airfield, or going back to the original one, if there are other airfields closer. Certainly, what we want to achieve is to get to that landing place, if you like, with a sensible amount of height to do something with it. It's no use getting to the airfield at 100 feet. Okay, so if you know that that's going to happen, abandon that idea. This is a dynamically changing situation, which the student needs to be thinking about. Just because you've got plan A doesn't mean it's going to work if you're going to end up at 100 feet. So let's change that, excuse me, to plan B. And let's pick a farmer's field while we have altitude and while we're at 2,000 feet to enable us to do that practice, or sorry, the forced landing into that field. The biggest thing is not to rely on partial power for anything. So always assume the worst, that it is going to fail and we're going to end up in an engine off situation. So the next part then is, after we've completed that exercise, now we've got a little bit more experience, perhaps we can go back to this situation where we are in the circuit and we have partial power after takeoff. So now we might be able to use a little bit of what we've got time in our hands now in order to perhaps extend the field selection that we might have available in order to execute that engine failure after takeoff. So we're still not necessarily advocating turning back to the field or using the partial power in a circuit. Certainly, we're trying to advocate make the best use of the power that you've got in order to achieve a satisfactory outcome. And again, the information there on standardization for the instructors. Okay, so in summary then, what we've got then is, for the actual PPL syllabus, we're going to look at exercise 6. We're going to add the exercise about finding what the minimum power is to maintain level flight at best glide speed. We've got 2 exercises to do with the circuit, which involves closing the throttle and executing a forced landing. Excuse me.
I'll give Nigel a chance to have a break. It's an occupational hazard of instructing examining that you spend lots of time in a closed environment with lots of different people. So Nigel's doing very well. And what I would just say is, that, you know, just while Nigel has a drink in it, this is a change because, and this is what I think Nigel's trying to get across with these scenarios, with this standardization, and the fact that these building blocks are kind of spread across all of the exercises, because we're very used to in our training, you have you know, an engine failure, do this, do that, do these actions. You know, you have a stall, standard stall recovery, do this, do that, do that. You know, this is more nuanced. You know, students may execute a variety of responses to a variety of situations, and you know, it might be a case of, okay, well, that worked, that's safe, but actually you could have done it in this way, or okay, that's fine. You know, it's all a bit nuanced, and there's no black and white answers to a lot of this stuff. So anyway, Nigel, I'll let you have a drink and
No, that's fine.
eat
Thanks.
a bit of your sandwiches.
The biggest thing is get at the forefront of your mind threat and error management to do with what skill the student has got at this stage of their training. That's the key thing, and give them the tools that they need to achieve the best outcome. So PPL syllabus there, as you can see, 12 and 13, then the exercise 16, tag it on the back of 16 after engine failure, after forced landings, to then deal with the partial power scenario more fully, and then go back to the previous exercises and maybe offer, as Matt suggested, some alternative but safe scenarios. Importantly, Matt alluded to earlier on, it's not just about partial power in the training. It is now included, or will be, as of October, in the skills test and also in an LPC. So the next slide is to do really with the other changes to do with the microlight syllabus changes. It's included in there as well. It's in the skills test as well. The exercise numbers are pretty similar. And then finally, you know, after that, then, you know, we're into the realms of how do we get this message across to existing pilots? And as instructors, that's where Charlotte comes in and tells us all about it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nigel. So there's a couple of questions I will just pick up now, just to give Charlotte. I mean, I'm going to read out what Jen has put in the chat, actually, because I really like it. So sorry, Jen, I'm going to steal. You know, it's the best form of flattery, isn't it? So she summarised it as option 1, dump it on the ground. Option 2, go somewhere nicer and dump it on the ground. be prepared to execute option 1 at any time. Don't fly over anything you wouldn't want to land on. I think that's a pretty cool summary. So yeah, well done. Like that. And if I was explaining it to somebody in a club bar that, you know, didn't have much time, elevator pitch, yeah, well done. Yeah, I like that as well. Nick has made a comment about minimum sink speeds the same as best endurance. Yes, and you know, it's again, it's going to be up to your judgment, I think, in your organisations, who you're dealing with, what aircraft types, as to how much you want to go into the speeds and that. Some of us may be instructing on diamonds and things that have got speed tapes and references in there as well. Some people may be, you know, instructing on Tiger Moss or aircraft types with very rough ASIs. So, you know, you'll have different capabilities. Nigel asked a question, has the AIB found a correlation between the age of the aircraft flown and partial power loss? I don't have any data to hand on that, and I'll ask Nigel and Charlotte if they've come across anything, but I don't think there is, no. I think this has happened to very new aircraft with very new engines, and I think it's also happened to quite old, you know, historic aircraft as well. So Nigel, I don't think there's any correlation.
I don't think there is. No, I mean, there's such a whole variety of problems that can, you know, end up as partial power loss. I've had partial power loss after takeoff at 300 feet. Fortunately for me, I already knew what the minimum power was for that aeroplane to maintain altitude, so I was able to do something about it and actually nurse it back to runway with options on the way. But again, that was because I have taught it and I teach it, and I knew what the minimum power setting was to start with. So there wasn't an immediate requirement to try to work out if I could maintain altitude or not. So it's all down to those sorts of scenarios. And as Matt says, I don't think it depends on age of aircraft. I think there is a whole raft of situations and scenarios that occur, both from a pilot perspective and an aircraft perspective, that can lead to partial power loss.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nigel. Yes, there's a few other questions we will pick up later on there as well. So yeah, questions are starting to come up, which is great. We'll give that. Charlotte, I'm going to hand over to you, Charlotte. Nigel and I done enough talking now, so let's hear your thoughts on refresher training. Charlotte, over to you.
Okay, so as we said previously, partial power loss is now included in the refresher training and revalidation or renewal tests. That's important to ensure this is covered with everybody. Different experience and skill levels may allow a greater range of options, but this will not necessarily ease the decision-making process. Should a partial power situation ever arise, having considered the issue beforehand, practice some scenarios and given it some thought may make all the difference in terms of good, timely decision-making. Scenario-based training works really well for the refresher training, as it allows it to be tailored to the aircraft and the circumstances and conditions on the day. Use of a simulator, if you've got one, also gives even more scope to explore different scenarios really fully. So we've got a few on the slide here to look at that might be useful. So we've got the partial engine failure on the climb out. If it's immediately after takeoff, when you've got little time for analysis of the problem, best option may be to focus on a successful forced landing and treat it as a full failure, as Nigel suggested earlier. Any residual power may allow an extended range of landing options, but obviously, as we've said before, it should not be relied upon. It's important to remain within reach of a suitable landing area at all times, in anticipation of further power reduction or full failure. The wind direction and strength on the day will dictate what these are going to be. If you've got a little bit more height, especially if you've got an aerodrome with multiple runways, it might be possible to then extend beyond that initial field choice to reach the airfield or even a runway. But again, you've got to think about wind direction, strength and conditions on the day as to what's going to be the best course of action. Looking at partial engine failure in the cruise, at typical cruise levels, there's a little bit more time and some more options, but also therefore more scope for indecision. So the key thing is, once flying the airplane at an appropriate speed, as Nigel discussed how we're assessing what that is, towards a suitable landing area, it should then be time for some diagnosis, which may inform subsequent decisions, maybe able to establish how stable the power output is, as to how far you might be able to get or how quickly the situation could deteriorate. It's useful to discuss at this point the risk of becoming fixated on a return to the airfield and the importance of having a plan B or changing the plan if required by events. Key is to emphasise selecting a route based on your suitable landing sites all the time in case it deteriorates further, rather than taking the most direct route back to the airfield with no suitable alternatives en route. Once in a position to land in the selected area, whether that's the airfield or a field chosen en route, again, power off landing should be performed. Avoids a distraction, especially if power available is inconsistent. You don't want to get distracted and think you can get a little bit further and then lose it. So once you're committed to a field or the airfield that you've chosen, close the throttle and make that power off landing. And then we've got partial engine failure on the takeoff run, rejected takeoff, talking about the decision making on that. We've also got looking at abnormal engine indications that be part of the diagnosis, maybe thinking about what could be going on and how long you're likely to have any partial power available for. And looking at scenarios where some early indications might appear before any symptoms, followed by partial power, possibly leading to eventual loss and forced landing. How the situation is out to develop in a training scenario may depend on the decisions that are made as you go along. In a developing situation, important to remain flexible to changing the plan as required, an emphasis on maintaining good landing options throughout and the power off landing once the location is reached. Whatever decisions are made during the training exercise, a lot of value to be had from the debrief discussion afterwards in terms of discussing alternative options that might have been available and possible reasons for selecting one over the other. We've got an example on the screen here. You can read the description on the slide, but it illustrates really the importance of flying the aircraft and selecting an appropriate speed, and that key point of heading towards a suitable landing site at an early stage to keep the options open. Continuing towards the airfield by the most direct route could be tempting, but it might limit options available later if the situation worsens. Important then, having got yourself heading towards a suitable landing site, to carry out some diagnosis of the issue, checking things like carb heat in this example, rather than making assumptions based on indications may or may not be giving you the full story. Okay, and I think back to Matt then to look at some TMG considerations.
Thanks, Charlotte. I think I was a bit trigger happy when we moved on one of your slides on too. That's my my error. So we'll have to mitigate that in the future. But there you go. So yeah, just a few TMG considerations as well, because we've already alluded to the fact that this is going to be rolled out through the SPL training here as well. Some things to think about. We know some TMGs have quite a low climb rate on normal power. That the remaining performance with any kind of partial power loss may be really very marginal. So if you're training and testing in TMGs, that exercise that we talked about the available power to actually stay level or have any reasonable amount of performance, it may not be an option, or it may be a very narrow banded option as well. So actually you may want to modify some of your training that if there's any kind of power loss in the climb or low down, that actually the consideration may be more biased towards treating it as a full engine failure, just because the residual remaining performance may be very marginal, especially on warm or nil wind days as well. I know there has been some accidents, you can read them as well, where TMGs have even failed to climb away successfully from forced landing options there as well. So yeah. And again, as I put there, a glide with the engine shut down may actually be better performance on a TMG than a partially failed windmilling engine there as well. So I know a lot of TMG training, certainly on the Grob motor gliders, that I used to teach, and I saw some people in the chat recognizing that as well. We used to do engine off rejoins and landings, and actually the performance with the engine shut down and feathered in the Grob 109 I showed on the photo there was considerably better coming back to the airfield than with a kind of windmilling or low power engine there as well, with the associated drag. Again, not giving you an aerodynamics lecture, but it's something that certainly on TMGs you may want to play around with some of those scenarios. The guidance is all biased towards single engine. We even, a lot of the stuff that's come out is talking about single engine, partial engine failure. But we did just want to make a nod to the multi-engine training there as well. Partial power loss on one engine in a multi, especially if you're in IMC, can be really insidious, really not so clear to detect, because the remaining performance, the aircraft may still be climbing well. The student or candidate may be concentrating quite hard on managing the aircraft, especially if they're in IMC. So it can be quite insidious to detect. It's not quite as obvious sometimes as in a single. Again, the remaining performance may be very marginal. Some of the older twins, especially when heavily loaded or in certain conditions, the remaining performance may be quite marginal. Have a read of the conditions and the performance charts, very much from the POH AFM as appropriate for your type. Yeah, aviate, navigate, communicate, diagnose. And as I've put there, a bit like the TMG case as well, a prompt decision to shut down and feather may actually be a better scenario in a multi than a failure to feather. There's a lot of multis. Well, I've just been doing quite a bit of instruction on a PA30 Comanche recently for one. That the engines on that will not, the propeller will not feather below 1500 RPM. Once the RPM drops below 1500, it won't feather. So a prompt decision to feather, you may end up with a kind of really quite suboptimal decision there as well. But if you're doing some multi-training, it's well worth doing. Just a gradual reduction in power. It's quite interesting one to do. I recommend it. Again, multi-engine training up to now has been very much, instructor, examiner covers the throttles, chops one, or smartly reduces one throttle to idle. Then there's lots of yaw, very apparent, kind of very difficult to control. That kind of gradual creeping back reduction of power on one engine is a really good scenario to do. It's quite challenging. More information on all of this, and then we'll start getting into some of the Q&A. The Australians were very leading on this as well, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau as well. There is document there all about partial power loss after takeoff in single-engined aircraft as well. It's been around a while now, but it's a really good reference source, and it's a good read there as well. They actually put some data behind this as well, and they were a little bit, they started to sow the seed of this subject across the industry, but it's got a lot more currency now as well. But it's still a really good read and really good background source. We've put a link in the chat box to that as well. We'll be getting all of these links in a post webinar email as well to find as well. So again, don't worry about having to scribble down or screenshot links just now. Right, we're going to move into some questions and answers. I've also, like I said, we've got Ed Bellamy and Justin Wilcox online as well. So I may ask them to come in. There's a couple of questions, Ed, Justin, that may be appropriate to yourself. So I will perhaps ask you to give you some thoughts as we go through in this last 20-30 minutes as well. So I'm just giving you fair warning to stand by so I don't ambush you. That's all there as well. So a few questions. Nigel, there's quite a lot of chat about the 180 turn that we discussed. You've probably seen it in the chat. Do you want to expand on what you mean and just kind of clarify what we're talking about for people? Because I think it's kind of maybe confused people a little bit as we cantered through.
So basically, engine failure after takeoff, don't do a 180 turn. It's practice what you teach effectively, in that on an engine failure after takeoff, the early student will close the throttle and treat it like an engine failure after takeoff. Sorry, partial power after takeoff, close the throttle, treat it like engine failure after takeoff. The scenario I was talking about was a scenario of having partial power on, for example, the downwind leg, where you will need somewhere to do a turn through 180 degrees, but you are at circuit altitude in order to land into wind. So in my view, that is one of the reasons why we teach a glide approach, because a glide approach is usually performed from a close-in downwind back to the runway, where you're assessing what the assessing what the glide performance is of the aircraft and selecting flaps appropriately to get to the runway. So again, in that situation, if you have partial power on the downwind leg, the better scenario is to close the throttle and execute that glide approach onto either the runway, if you can achieve it, or to onto a suitable landing surface if the runway is too far away. But either way, that's going to involve turning into wind. So that's what we mean by what I mentioned about the 180 turn from the downwind position to land into wind, not advocating turning back to the runway, okay, when you are going away from the runway on a takeoff. Does that make it clear, or worse?
Hopefully it makes that clear for you. It's difficult to sort of explain without doing it practically. But I'll give you an example. Runway 19 at Oxford, the right-hand circuit, because of noise abatement, so you can be fairly tight in, actually, kind of over Blenheim Palace. And if you had a partial engine failure, you could probably kind of turn and get towards the old disused cross runway, maybe, or at least to somewhere on the airfield on a flat kind of green, safe-ish surface. If you're on 19 left-hand, which is the normal runway, and that you're over Kidlington and the towns there as well, there is probably very little way that you're going to be able to turn and get anywhere near back towards the airfield, especially with the noise abatement and the heights and that. So it's a case of turning out from the circuit and going somewhere. Now that might be a field kind of off to the crosswind, or it might be kind of sort of really turning back towards Oxford and the meadows and things like that way as well. So it's very scenario, very individualistic based as to where you are and what you can do. But all we're trying to introduce is the fact that partial power loss, you may have to maneuver the aircraft to go and get somewhere suitable. But if you're on downwind, just kind of pointing ahead and doing a downwind landing may be kind of suboptimal. I don't know if you're in a light wind day or that's all that's available. I think I saw some comments from some people in Cornwall, Devon or something. I think they maybe got the sea in certain parts of their circuit. So, doing a downwind landing may be the better option. I don't know. So there you go. And yeah, somebody's just pointed out an emergency noise abatement goes out the window. Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm referring to is the fact that the noise abatement in normal operations, the noise abatement may position you in such a place where gliding back to the airfield is not applicable. So I'm not talking about obeying noise abatement during an emergency situation. I'm alluding to the fact that the noise abatement may have put you at a distance that is suboptimal. Charlotte, I don't know what the circuits are like at Goodwood and whether you have any challenges like that.
We're fortunate to have 3 runways, so we've got different runways you might be able to get back to, but and we're pretty lucky with fields, so we've got a lot of noise abatement, but a lot of fields as well. So yeah,
and all grass airfield, I think, as well, isn't it? So it's all
yes, any part of the airfield would do for landing in an emergency situation.
Which is great. So hopefully that that kind of cleared that one up a little bit there as well. Just scrolling down some of the other things there as well. Yeah, just picking up on this 180 again as well. There was some comments which was quite useful about how to actually practice that, busy circuit. Going back to my Oxford example, Oxford's really busy. You have to get circuit slots, and it's all very integrating with, twin training and biz jets and stuff. How do you practice this? What do you think, Nigel? I mean, you might, Earl's Colne, you might have the space and time to do it. I don't know. So as head of training, perhaps everybody gets out of your way, Nigel. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, of course, you don't have to practice, being downwind at an airfield. You could simulate it out in the wild, so to speak, away from other places, or sorry, away from other airfields, I should say. So it's and strange that it's the same with engine failure after takeoff. Yeah. So what I personally don't teach engine failure after takeoff at our airfield. We do the odd one or two, because obviously people get familiar with where the nicest fields are for a given wing condition, which is always good local knowledge. But the skill in engine failure after takeoff is, is having a quick decision, picking the field, and doing what you need to get into it. So to simulate that, we typically do that out in the wild, so to speak. So we'll do a dummy approach to a field somewhere, some farmer's field, execute a go around, and then on the go around we'll have either partial power or engine failure after takeoff, where they then have to close the throttle and make a good field selection based on what they see in front of them. So just because a circuit might be busy and you think it might preclude doing the exercise, that's not actually the case. You can do it out and be a bit more inventive about where you do your training.
Yeah, no, great stuff, Nigel. And there's more questions coming in about noise abatement and stuff. I'll just re-emphasize, we're not talking about following noise abatement in an emergency situation. That is 100% out of the window. That the point we're trying to make is many airfields will have noise abatement or restrictions such that the normal circuit, so you take off, you're flying normally, and because you have to follow noise abatement, it puts you at such a distance, say from the airfield on crosswind or on that you can't glide back to the airfield, or it puts you in a really kind of odd position because you have to fly around the thing. So that's what we're talking about with noise abatement. Hopefully that makes that sense. Yeah. And somebody said, yeah, Booker seems to take you almost across 2 counties outside the ATZ. Yeah, a lot of airfield noise abatement will take you outside the ATZ these days. So that's kind of what we're getting at. Hopefully that makes sense for you. Yeah, and Pete has just said several examiners will do the FARTO straight after a PFL, not in the circuit. I often do exactly the same because on the skills test I can't be guaranteed to get the FARTO in with traffic and that busy airfields and that. So Nigel, I'm guessing you probably do the same as well. So
yeah, absolutely. We do it off the PFL. So and then on the go around from that, it's engine failure after takeoff away from an airfield on test. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Question for Ed or Justin, if I can bring you in there. We've had a few questions about whether these changes are being introduced into the regs for our EASA colleagues as well. I don't know whether Ed or Justin, you're able to just come in and answer that one. Hello, Ed.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for such a good presentation, guys. So they certainly have put some pieces in around the AMC to FCL 740A, which is the biannual refresher training for the SEP TMG racing. I'm not aware that they've added anything to the PPL syllabus as such, so I don't think they've gone quite as far as we have in that regard. Justin, I don't know if you know differently.
Trying to get it to work. Nope, I don't think so. I was just having a look myself quickly on the EASA website, but I don't think so.
Okay, great. Thanks, gents. Justin and Ed, while you're on and gratefully with us, is there anything you'd like to comment on or just observe or point out, especially in relation to, the caps and the national changes and refresher training I mentioned? If there's anything you'd like to emphasise to the crowd we've got, now's a good opportunity.
Not particularly, I don't think. If anyone does have any questions once we've exhausted the Q&A on the topic of partial power, happy to take some about the sort of licensing changes more generally. Just on the national requirements, so for the MPPL, etc., as I think Matt's already said, that everything that's being done for the PPL will be essentially copied across for the MPPL as well, and that will be reflected in the relevant documentation shortly.
I've just got a couple of bits that I noted down. Right at the beginning, I noticed in the chat, someone said that magenta isn't a particularly good colour for colourblind people. I will feed that back to our council team and everything to say, is there something else we can do when we're amending regulations to see whether we can be a bit more inclusive. I fly from Rochester. And you are limited with some of your options if you have an engine failure after takeoff. So I was very interested to see all the different options that people were talking about in terms of where they do the training, how they would do and handle not just an engine failure after takeoff, but also a partial power loss and how they would manage that. We've touched on the answer thing. I think there was one very good question which people are putting in there, which is the challenge between exercise 6 and exercise 8 of the syllabus, in as much as when do you actually bring in the best glide speed within the PPL syllabus. And so there may be a case of when you're in exercise 6, you haven't really approached that at that precise moment. So I think it's the key in exercise 6 is the management of minimum power versus that speed to maintain height. And this is where you're introducing that to the pilot so they can get in their mind that I actually need a couple of bits to maintain this height or to continue to climb. So I think those are the things that I spotted. So thanks very much. Great presentation, guys. Thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Justin. There's a few comments as well about whether the skills test forms and that are going to be amended as well, or there'll be a transition period. Don't know, Ed or Justin, whether I don't know, whether are you allowed to sleep between now and the 1st of October to get all this done? I'm not sure. I don't know.
The skill test forms were done today, actually. They haven't been published yet, but so the PPLA skill test form will be updated to include the optional use of VFR moving map devices. You won't actually see a reference to partial power failures under the section 5 of the PPL skill test. It will be a discretionary item under the sort of general abnormal procedures. I forget the letter now. So
6, I think, yeah.
The examiner handbook of standards documents will be updated to give a bit of guidance as to how that's applied in practice.
Brilliant. So there you go. Heard it here first. And a few people have said will apply to students in training today, or so officially the regulation, I think it just in Ed, it's fair to say officially it takes place from the 1st of October. But even now we have the discretion as examiners to use these scenarios. So you could find an examiner during a test doing this as well. Yeah.
I've certainly used it on test on our students that I examine, because I know they have been taught it as part of the syllabus already. So yeah. Yeah,
and there's some really good discussion coming out about the partial engine failure skew towards going to forced landing without power rather than continuing flying. I think, and this is kind of what Charlotte was alluding to in her bit as well. A lot of this depends on your type. It depends on the experience level of the individual involved. It depends on currency and things like that as well. Because I'm guessing, Charlotte, I don't know, in your beautiful vintage type of partial power loss, maybe it probably very much conditioned towards getting it in a decent field pretty quickly, I'm imagining, rather than trying to stagger somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, it depends on how much power you've got as to how much you can afford to lose before you're starting to have big problems. But yeah, definitely. And also how much field do you need? It's something like that flies pretty slowly. A smaller field is it, so you've got a lot more options fairly quickly.
Yeah, and I know Nigel does a fair bit of Cirrus instructing. I'm supposed to be flying Cirrus tomorrow as well. A lot of our microlight colleagues on as well have got CAPS considerations there as well. So CAPS is an increasing option as well, isn't it, Nigel? So.
Absolutely. I mean, you've probably got a little bit more time in the Cirrus because you're already ingrained in the Cirrus way of doing things, with having a hard deck, so to speak, to put Top Gun terms on it, a hard altitude by which you will pull caps in any event. So if you're drifting down under partial power, then if you can't make an airfield long enough to do a successful landing of it, then the Cirrus way is to pull caps anyway.
Great. Like I say, we are getting into we've got a little bit more time, so people do want to ask about the new regulations and that, please, we'll try and pick some of those up as well while I go down things. Somebody's asked, when will we get the new regulation? It is all there. So it's all live on the system for you to see now, like say with that magenta text that are sorted about as well. Ken has asked about how to treat a situation where there's no power loss, sorry, caps, just to say that's the basically the parachute, the ballistic parachute systems. Caps is the Cirrus term. So I kind of said Hoover when I meant vacuum cleaner, didn't I, in a way? So yeah, ballistic parachute system there as well. It may be termed differently in certain microlights and things. Sorry, going back to Ken, who's talked about no power loss, but strange, loud, persistent noise coming from the engine compartment. Is this treated the same as a partial engine failure? Well, Charlotte, what are your thoughts here? Because this is what you were talking about with strange indications and that, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, it's all about starting to do some diagnosis, I guess, and see if you can work out what's happening. But anything that's not going normally could potentially deteriorate. So it's straightly to that. Where can I go if this gets worse? While you work through the problem.
That's it. And just for that, so I fly the Grob Tutor as well for the Air Force as a reservist. And the way we talk about it is the kind of the engine failures in three types, really. You have the fire, which is obviously quite a specific scenario that you deal with in a certain way. You then have a mechanical failure. Symptoms of things like, you know, very loud bang, propeller stops, you know, visible mechanical damage, oil loss over the canopy or things like that. But you also, on the other hand, have the non-mechanical failure, which is, you know, propeller maybe windmilling, slight loss of power, rough running, strange noises, things like that as well. And it just tries to condition you into a case of, well, in the one scenario, the engine's clearly, you know, gone. It's duff. It's a mechanical failure. The priority is to shut down the engine and make a forced landing. In the other scenario, it's you know, we want to still fly. We want to do that aviate, navigate, communicate, age-old adage and all that good stuff about diversion and that Nigel talked about. But in that second leg of the scenario, we might also want to try, if time permits and it's safe to do so, some diagnosis. We may want to try and improve the situation if we can, but we're always being prepared for a full engine failure there as well.
I think the key thing there, I didn't allude to it, but it's actually on one of the slides, is you know, make sure if you have partial power and you're able to maintain altitude, make sure you have your field selected before you start diagnosing, because you might make it worse. So just bear that one in mind as well.
Yeah, lots of discussion about, again, where to fit it in the syllabus, straight and level, gliding and things like that. Yeah, great debates. And, you know, this is exactly the kind of thing that I recommend as you as training organisations go and look at your syllabuses and your evolvement of these as we go along. So when will we have CA direction on GPS training? Ed or Justin, do you want to take that? I kind of know the answer, but I'll let you give a view.
Justin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So Ed has put the link to the licensing training simplification into the chat. What we can also do is we can put the link to the AMC and the GM, so it's the acceptable means of compliance and the guidance material, into the chat. In there, and now, apologies, it is a big document. There's a lot of stuff in there that's been removed, redacted. Obviously, the LAPL stuff's all coming out. But in there, as you scroll down, you'll note where it starts bringing in the PPL syllabus and the use of moving map systems devices in both the PPL and also within the refresher flight training element of it as well. So it's all in there. And there's also links to things like Skyway Code, safety sense leaflets, where we've got additional guidance around doing training on or learning on these different systems.
Brilliant, thanks, Justin. And a few people are asking about the NPPL syllabus and details now, because I think I'm right in saying, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong. So the Part FCL constructural idea is that you know, the AMC and the guidance material goes in the regulation, whereas in the national licenses, the A&O, it has the kind of the top level thing, but then the more detailed stuff about syllabuses, how to get ratings and what to achieve and tests and that goes in the caps as opposed to actually in the regulation. Have I described that fairly, or?
Yes, indeed. So the MPPL SEP TMG syllabus will be given a minor overhaul, and it will include the changes for partial power loss training and also the use of VFR moving map devices. That should be published quite soon, as in the next couple of weeks, but it will be essentially the same as what we've been discussing this evening in terms of the Part FCL AMC. So if you want to have a look at that, will apply equally to the MPPL. But yeah, it'll be in a cap rather than in the regulatory library stuff is generally just for the assimilated, i.e. the former European regulations. The A&O is on legislation.gov, and then the associated kind of caps under that.
And yeah, we've used caps a few times. So caps, when I was talking about parachutes, ballistic parachutes, cap is is it civil? I'm going to air publication, aviation publication. Is it civil aviation publication? Did I get that right?
Yeah, civil aviation publication.
Oh, phew. I should have asked you that, Nigel. I should have asked you that. You'd have known. So somebody's also asked about, with SEP, TMG and 3-axis being put in the same basket for revalidations, will the similar apply to instructor certificates, e.g. can an instructor AOC on a 3-axis microlight credit revalidation of a CRI for SEP or TMG? So I'm not 100%, I don't know, Justin or Ed or Nigel, you want to pick that up? I think the answer is the instructor and examiner AOCs are class agnostic, aren't they? But you have to cover the other classes with appropriate questioning if you don't do it on the thing. So
I think not many people will realise the fact that what you've just said there, in that, you know, on the new scheme, if you fly an SEP and a TMG and a 3-axis microlight, then if you do your 1-hour instruction with someone on a 3-axis microlight, that counts towards the others now. It never used to count towards the other ratings. So as long as you've got your total 12 hours, including 1 hour dual, then that counts for all of the ratings to be revalidated. At least that's what I assume the reg says. That's the way I read it. Perhaps Ed can tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So two things there. I'll Justin, I might get you to answer the AOC question on microlights. But in terms of the rating, so for Part FCL licenses and ratings, obviously there's no microlight rating. That's an A&O construct. An SEP rating after appropriate differences training can fly a microlight, and once you've done that, as you say, Nigel, you can now, after the 1st of October, use microlight time, including for George, for a fresher flight to keep that current. And of course, that will also cross credit the TMG rating if you have one. So the microlight rating doesn't really come into it on the Part FCL ratings. For the MPPL, it's slightly different again, because obviously we have a microlight rating for the MPPL, and that will continue, but the model will change slightly such that all the time you can basically use any time from any of the ratings on your license to credit all of the ratings. But something that's changing from the current MPPL setup is that currently the SSEA rating on the MPPL, the TMG and the SLMG and the microlight are all kind of mutually exclusive. They're all they don't the privileges don't read across. Whereas a side effect of putting SEP rather than SSEA on the MPPL is that an MPPL holder with SEP can now fly microlights subject to differences training without needing a separate microlight rating. I appreciate that's all a bit sort of complex, but essentially what you said, Nigel, was correct. And yeah, if you want to, Justin, if you want to answer the AOC question, perhaps.
I get the easy answer, the AOCs. Unfortunately, no, they're not merged, so they will be separate. So the AOC that you do to maintain your FI on SCP will be separate to the test that you would do to maintain an FI microlight. So they're remaining separate at the moment.
Okay, great. And there's also, I don't want to go into details because it gets really complex about TMGs now, but suffice to say, I can't cover all the scenarios here and that with TMGs, but just be careful with TMGs is my advice, because TMG is a rating that can be on aeroplanes and aeroplane licenses, and it can also be on sailplanes and sailplane licenses. It crosses both things. So, for example, I'm a TMG examiner, but I hold aeroplane licenses, so I can go and test somebody, as I'm doing in a few weeks' time on a GROB 109, for the addition of a TMG rating to their PPL. That's great. I can't do effectively the same test on the same aeroplane for this individual, but also is wishing to add a TMG extension to his sailplane license, because I'm not a sailplane instructor or examiner. So my advice is use the BGA experts, and consult with them. If you're an instructor, examiner, you're going to be doing anything on TMGs and you're unsure, do your research is my advice, because there are some nuances with it all. I think that's fair to say, Ed, isn't it? We can't cover them all here, but just be careful with TMGs is my advice. And that was there was an actual, I think there was an accident and an AIB recommendation around that as well, because there was an accident where somebody was examining, instructing, I think, on TMGs, but didn't hold TMG differences, and there was an issue with air brakes and things like that. The individual was very experienced airplane examiner, didn't have the experience of TMG, so it is worth taking some time on that as well. Lots of discussion as well about it's obviously really peaked as about this, the glide speed, minimum sink speed, or whatever. I think, and that's great. So the fact that the debate is coming up and people are coming of it is really good. So I think my advice is go away and in a safe and appropriate manner, go away and experiment with it in your aeroplanes and your training organization. And just see how it works out and see how it looks. What do you think, Nigel?
For the experienced pilot, certainly, but when you're teaching ab-initio stuff, they do not want a multitude of speeds to remember, and the glide speed and the sorts of aeroplanes that we teach on is so close to minimum sink speed. It's not really, in my view, worth worrying about. Give them one speed to remember, glide speed, and use that.
Bill, and a few questions about engine indications and things like that as well. It might be RPM, it might be manifold pressure, some of the diamonds and things like that. It may be a percentage power. So I think, Nigel, Charlotte, again, you've just got to tailor it to your types, I think, haven't you, really?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, manifold pressure is an indication of power in a VP prop aeroplane. Fixed pitch, it's RPM. So horses for courses. It's whatever you need to show the student to determine what the power setting is that you're trying to look at for this best glide speed to maintain altitude.
Yeah, and Charlotte, in your Cessnas, what have you got? Is it percentage power on Garmin's? Is it, or
RPM?
It's RPM. There you go. So
good.
diamonds, percentage power, isn't it? So yeah, and the diesel. So yeah, whatever is your it works for you as well. Okay, brilliant. I think we'll wrap up there as well. Somebody's just made the point as well. Yeah, students struggle to hold speed within knots anyway. So yeah, absolutely agreed as well. Sorry if we've talked lots of acronyms at the end there as well. It's unfortunately where we are with the regulation that as well. Hopefully, this licensing simplification, these changes that are coming in October, will start to remove some of these layers and some of these differences, so we can move towards a more simpler world in the future, hopefully. Right, we hope you've been able to take something away from this evening. Thank you, everybody, for your engagement and great involvement here as well. There is one more question, but I will pick up. It's just come in, actually, and we will pick it up because it's a useful one to do, but I'll just finish this bit. Once you finish tonight, a survey will pop up in your window. Please take the time to fill this out. And I know it's the cliche, but your feedback is valuable to us. And the reason being, in this survey, we get trends, we get information about what's worrying people or what people want to know about in industry. So we get to tailor our webinars based on things that people want to know about. So we did the aviation medical one. We're doing some about GNSS training. We've done some things before about human factors, decision making. We've done mental health. It's all things that have come up on through the survey, and we pick up those trends. Like I say, we don't send it to CA or anything like that as well. Big thank you to the team, Nigel, Charlotte, and Justin and Ed as well for their open, candid engagement this evening, and Tal running it in the background there as well. The question that I did just spot was to a couple of people did just ask about if they come across an experienced pilot, they're doing a revalidation, a refresher, and they haven't come across partial power before, is it mandatory to do it? So I think, Nigel, Ed, I think the right answer is highly recommended. It's really recommended, and you can expect that some of the examiners that doing the test would be majoring on this. I know I certainly am with tests that I do. Nigel, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think from the CA guidance on the refresher training for the revalidation of the rating, the instructor is supposed to choose things from the LPC syllabus. So it would be perfectly legitimate to especially look at partial power if they have not come across this before, because as we've said, partial power is the one that's going to kill you because that's the one that people have not technically at the moment been trained in, and that's the reason for the whole of this scenario that we're talking about putting it in the syllabus to train people to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Nick's picking me up there. Refresher training is not a test. Yes, we know that. Yeah, I've tried to simplify the language, whether you're doing a proficiency check, whether you're doing refresher training or whatever that you're doing. The point is, and I think we perhaps haven't made this point specifically, but what this is all about is this is not just kind of kicking the tires, jumping in the aircraft and getting going. It's about having an appropriate briefing and appropriate discussion prior to your flight. So the kind of the chat before and afterwards, and Charlotte really mentioned this with the debrief. So the chat around the subject before and after, with a coffee or even sitting around chewing the fat out at the aircraft, is just as important as what you're doing in the air with this as well, to upskill our pilots out there as well. So yeah,
Matt,
great.
Could I just add one little quick bit?
Of course you can. We've got 3 minutes, Justin. Please feel free.
Thank you very much. So there's Alistair has picked up one question about doing a test. So obviously this all comes in from the 1st of October. So with the test, partial power loss will be included from the 1st of October. So if the test you're doing is before, it's not mandatory. Post, it will be mandatory. However, exactly what Nigel and you have just said, if you're doing a dual refresher flight with someone prior to the 1st of October, then I would strongly recommend you as the instructor introduce partial power loss. Even though it's not necessarily in the dual refresher flight, it's a good opportunity to bring it in as early as possible as part of the training. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. Absolutely brilliant inputs, everybody. Please, you'll get our contacts are up there. If you have issues, feedback, send it. We do collate it all through the surveys and through emails that we get, and we will be doing post-event, share, discussion, debrief with Ed, Justin and the team as well. So anything that you do want to feedback to us will certainly get taken into account. Look forward to engaging with some of you. We've got we're talking about UPRT and loss of control in a few months. We're also going to be talking about GNSS and those changes in that introduction into the syllabus and teaching and testing going forward as well. So some really great things to keep us all entertained on these dark and damp evenings. But I'm in my garden office and the owl is hooting outside, which I think is my indication to finish for the night and go back in. Do fly safe. If everybody around, if you meet up with us, see us around airfields, do come and say hello, do come and chat, and it's great to see you and meet you in person as well. But thanks from everybody, and we look forward to future events. Take care all.